Hey there, welcome to another episode of Facilitators Q&A. This series is dedicated to helping facilitators practice their craft of facilitation to design better, more engaging, more trusting conversations with our teams. So far in this series, I've created 10 videos to share my ideas and methods and tips for you to try and learn from. And I'm excited to say that the very first guest that I'm having to the series is a friend of mine, Richard Banfield, who is the VP of Design Transformation at InVision. Rich and I had a lot to talk about. In fact, it turned into 2 videos that will be part of this series. What we're talking about is getting over the fear of imposter syndrome as a facilitator, because facilitation isn't really a skill that we're taught. It's not a class that we take. It's something that we just throw ourselves into. We raise our hands to say, I'll lead that meeting. And so Rich has lots of good lessons for you to think about and learn from. In part 1, Rich answers the question why facilitation is such a growing, important skill. And then he talks about getting over this false expectation we set for ourselves of showing up as the expert and the muscle that you can start to use more and more of to push against that fear. So then why is facilitation important? Why should teams really consider spending some time getting better at the craft of facilitation?
I think there's 2 parts to that question. One is, do you bring a facilitator in if you need that third-party perspective? If you've got a group of people who are coming together for the first time, or a group of people that's not used to working with each other, or there's not a deep sense of security or safety or trust between those people, having facilitator in the room gives that neutrality to the conversation. It allows the conversation to be mediated, just like you would in a divorce or any legal matter. The reason why you have representation is because you need the proxy to be able to share in a much more neutral fashion. So that's the one area of why facilitation is important, the kind of the umbrella of why it's important. Why individuals should learn how to be good facilitators. Everything is a conversation. Every single thing in the world is a conversation. Whether you're conversing with a machine, like your device, or whether that device is actually sharing information with a server, that's a conversation. There's a handoff, there's a conversation, there's an engineering version of that, there's a human version of that, there's a cultural version of that. Everything is a sharing. And when we absorb that and start to realize that, then we realize that facilitation, both in the facilitation of others and also in the facilitation of yourself, is like a step closer to a moment of real self-acknowledgement and understanding, and even a kind of an enlightenment moment where you're like, oh, there's that little voice in my head that's always whining and complaining and maybe throwing me off where I want to be, my ego, for example. And there's the consciousness of me that wants to know what's truthful and good and right, and those things are sometimes in conflict. Well, facilitating that in your head is actually something you can do once you become a good facilitator. You can start to say, well, what is the question I would ask? What is the problem we're trying to solve? You get down to first principles, and that allows you just to be a good facilitator of your own internal dialogue, and also the dialogues you would have with your teammates and between others as well.
Yeah. Rich, so one thing that I've noticed over the years of honing my craft as a facilitator, specifically to being hired to be a design sprint facilitator, is this fear that I had to show up fully prepared on the topic, that I had to be a subject matter expert.
Right.
And so I think one thing that I've always wondered is, am I showing up as a consultant to have all the answers, or as a facilitator? What are you seeing?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's funny you should say that, because I think we've probably all had that experience more than once. And maybe unless you're a sociopath, you have that every time you walk into a room. And I think that one of the ways that we compensate for that is to try and be the expert. We try and fulfill the expectations of the room and of ourselves to be the smartest one with all the answers. Maybe that's what people think a facilitator needs to be. They need to be the person who can provide the solutions as well as also facilitate the conversation. And of course, that's garbage, right? We're not there to provide answers. We're there to facilitate a conversation and to keep that conversation directed, aligned, inclusive, making sure that everybody feels heard. The way that I kind of stumbled on it, and this was partly because of the way that I approach my article and book writing, is through a sense of curiosity. The idea is that instead of showing up as the expert, I show up as a journalist, as a curious person who's got a whole bunch of interesting questions that I think I would love to hear the answers to, and also others might want to hear the answers to that. So, in a little bit of kind of like fake it before you make it kind of thing, I get myself into this mindset of, okay, I'm Malcolm Gladwell, and I'm walking to a room, and I'm there to understand. I'm there to be curious about what people are doing and why they're doing it, and what kind of biases and pretenses they're bringing to that conversation. So how many good questions can I come up with in order to facilitate that?
One thing that happens for me when I hear people talking about like a phrase that I hear a lot is I'm just naturally curious.
Mm.
And that doesn't resonate for me. Like a
Mhm.
lot of the time, I think that I'm selfish. I think that I'm like, I have my blinders on.
Mm.
So what can you do to help people like me just feel like it's okay to be curious, even if you feel like you're wired a different way?
Well, I think, you might think of yourself as not being curious, but that would then also like set you aside as being the only human being that is not curious. Like human beings are naturally curious, otherwise we'd still be in caves breaking stones. We're interested in what's happening. You may not see it as curiosity, but you may see it as domain expertise or mastery. And those things might feel good for you because as somebody who, as you said, like has a sense of self or is selfhood orientated, that the sense of mastery might be the driver or the intrinsic motivator behind that. And then you might say, well, how do I get to mastery? And we all know that, whether you're going to a spiritual source or to an academic source, it's through Q&A, right? It's through that, investigation or exploration or discovery. So you may use different words, discovery being probably the one that's used most frequently in the design product space that we're in. But it's really the same thing. Discovery is really just kind of digging in and understanding.
Yeah. Just curiosity just takes many forms, basically. Yeah.
Yeah.